Hello, thanks for coming. Just to make your expectations clear, I will speak English during this presentation. Um, yeah, I know it says in the program, but just to make it clear. And I'm going to be talking about leadership. Last summer, we launched the Kanban Maturity Model in Bilbao, Spain, to this European market. And I talked about leadership in order to illustrate what we mean about leadership. I used some characters to make the points clear. That's what I'm going to do in the beginning here. I'll talk about Jon Snow. Hope you like Game of Thrones. But about us, we are a management training company. We teach the Kanban method and associated practices. We make Agile something that managers start to like, and they want to hear more from us. And so that's one of the ways we work with agility in the organization. We also teach what we call the alternative path to agility, the Kanban method. I'll talk a little bit about that here, but my focus is on leadership today. And this is my plan. First, just to define leadership, because everybody can say leadership, but what exactly do you mean? So I want to be specific, I want to be pragmatic, practical. I'm not saying that other people's definition is wrong, I'm just being clear about what I'm talking about when I talk about leadership. And then second, one of the parts of leadership, I'll go into the details about that, and that's where I'll have lots of examples. And then of course, if you're a coach, you might be a scrum master and don't think you're a coach, but if you're helping other people be willing to try agile practices, I would say you can call yourself a coach. But what can we do? What can they do to make a difference? How can we help them? And then finally, hopefully something inspiring at the end. But to define leadership, what is it? So I started with these questions. What do we do with leaders? What do leaders do? And people who follow leaders, they decide, I'll let the leader decide. So what color shirt should I buy in 2019? A leader in the fashion industry decides the colors of the shirts, and we follow their leadership. How should I treat this customer? The leaders define the policy, and we follow their leadership. We defer decisions. So leaders make decisions. They make decisions for other people. And we listen to them. If leaders have something to say, we listen to them. And more importantly, the impact of us listening to them, they influence what we decide to do. For example, what color shirt to buy or how to treat the customer. Our decisions are shaped by their influence. So if we think of there's two sides to leadership, maybe it's like a coin with two sides. There's them deciding things or defining things and then influencing others to agree and to be willing to take steps to do what they've decided, to execute. So the influence side of leadership. We can identify 4 ways to do that. And the reason to do that is to be able to give some advice to the leaders that you work for. If you're an Agile coach, for example, there might be a director, vice president, some manager, and if only they understood Agile, if only they agreed with us, they would support our Agile transformation. And if only the leader would speak up when we're not really following the practices properly. So what exactly could a leader do to help support you with the Agile transformation? Well, if they don't have anybody following them, they're not much of a leader. And so there may be someone with a job title that puts them in a position of authority. But if they're not the one that people are following, I suggest you find the ones who have the influence and start talking to them. But ideally, this is what we want. And if you're familiar with Kanban method, there's a book that came out about 10 years ago. This is on the cover. This has been the essence from the beginning with the method, and it's leadership. So in this case, you probably recognize what's going on here just by looking. Here, there's a whole lot of work that isn't finished. Here, there's a little bit of work. There's no work happening here. A little bit of work happening here. And you can hear these people are complaining. I'm too busy. I got nothing to do. I'm stuck. But somebody's saying, let's do something about it. That's leadership right there. Somebody's saying, let's do something about it. Not you do something about it, although that's basically leadership too. And there's a difference between saying, let's do something about it, and just taking care of it yourself. But that's what we would like. But I want to talk about how to develop as a leader from somebody who just takes initiative, someone who just solves a problem, to somebody who can get others to solve problems. And so in the 4 types of influence, 4 different ways to influence people, we can think in terms of how much autonomy or how much interference or authority that you're going to assert with them. So in Agile, we're familiar with self-organizing teams. A completely self-organizing team, the leadership is just giving them a lot of autonomy. They're leading them, but they're giving them autonomy. And then the opposite of that would be the leader telling them what to do. And so we can define that in terms of, they direct people. So you know what leading by direction is. Do this, don't do that. That one's obvious. Leading by example, you're probably very familiar with that as well. Do as you want others to do. If you want people to show up early, you show up early. That one's pretty obvious as well. Signaling, leading or influencing other people by providing some kind of a signal. It's a little bit less direct, a little bit more oblique, which means indirect. And you allow the results to happen. In other words, if I signal what I want, but I don't direct and don't tell people, they have to interpret what I mean. And so there's a little bit more art there. And then the final one, inspire, that's the most vague, the least concrete, practical way to lead, but it could be some of the most powerful ways, and we'll have some examples. But I like to think of inspiring as a leadership practice as you create an idea or an image or a picture of something that doesn't exist yet, and people recognize where they are, and they see this gap, and that gap is motivating them to become better or to reduce more, like fewer bugs, better quality, higher performance. You paint a picture of something that they could be, and ideally that motivates them to aspire to that. So let's look at some examples. And I mentioned I was going to talk about Jon Snow, and this is mostly going to be centered around the wall up in the north of the Game of Thrones universe. So I probably can't see everybody's hands, but if you could raise your hands. Have you seen the show, and do you know who I'm talking about, Jon Snow? Or suddenly I see all sorts of stuff. I think you're all wearing dark clothes. And with this light, I can't see anything, but I can see all your hands. So that's good. There's people out there. That's great. But yeah, so Jon Snow at the wall. Remember, when he went there, he was a young kid. On TV, he was kind of an older guy, but in the books, he's like 14 or 15 years old. So he's a little boy going to the wall. But he clearly has a character arc in that story where he becomes a better and a more powerful leader every season. He makes huge mistakes, like his father did, but he survived his mistakes because, he's Jon Snow. But let's take a look at these 4 types of influence, 4 types of acts of leadership in examples from him. What's he doing here? I don't know if you don't remember this scene. I think it's probably season 2 or 3. Anyway, he's about to say loose. So he was telling people to take an arrow and a bow and load, put the arrow on the bow. Lock, draw, get ready to fire the bow. And then he says loose, and hundreds of people let go at the same time. So he's telling them what to do step by step. Now, if you think about the circumstances here, there's 100 people up on top of a giant wall of ice, but there's 100,000 people coming to kill them. So it's a pretty urgent situation. You can't really tolerate mistakes. If there's any miscommunication, that's a serious problem. So he's telling them one at a time what to do. And in fact, these terrified men who are going to face 100,000 enemies, they actually have a comfort because somebody's telling them what to do step by step. Leading by direction has its place, and it can be the best choice for you at some times. So it's not like it gets better the further down that scale you go. They're just different. So Jon Snow also leads by example. Plenty of instances of the show about him doing that. Here, in this case, it's the same battle. He took the elevator down, and if you can tell, there's a super dangerous guy right here. He's like the meanest, biggest, most dangerous guy in the enemy. And he goes down and he takes them on. He fights them. You know, it's 100,000 versus 100. And Jon Snow goes down there, I'll fight him. You know, I'll take on the biggest guy. I would imagine he's showing it's not time to retreat yet. It's not time to run away. It's still time to keep fighting. His example encourages everybody else. It's okay. I can trust this guy. I can stick with him. Sometimes leading by example puts you at risk. You're taking the risk. If you're the one who does the right thing when nobody else is doing the right thing, that's risky. But it's effective. And it's still very obvious, what should everybody else do? They should fight in this case. There's no question. What should I do? Follow the leader. So the next 2 are a little bit more vague, but I'll give you some good examples of them. So signaling. In this case, Jon Snow, the 18-year-old boy, was just elected in an election as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Now, this is like a really tough group of people. Mostly they're older with beards and wrinkles. They look like me, but with a beard. But he's a young boy, and they just voted, we want him to rule us. We want him to be the leader. And immediately, within a minute, somebody says, I'm not going to follow your orders. Go to hell. I'm not going to listen to some stupid little boy tell me what to do. Immediately, right when he gets elected, his first task at the job is to deal with a much older man who is actually a lord disobeying him. And Jon Snow's not a bad leader, even though he's still young and makes big mistakes. He's in a conflict with this guy, and he's restating, I need you got to follow my order. And the man refuses. So he punishes him. I don't know if you know what's going on here. Can you imagine what's about to happen? So this is the guy who disobeyed him. And sure, he gave him a direction, and he failed to follow it, and he punishes him. He's leading on multiple levels here. But what I noticed the most out of this is he's communicating, he's signaling, I'm the boss. After this incident, nobody has a question. Jon Snow is the Lord Commander. No more questions about that. Does that make sense? He's made a very powerful signal. I think of signaling as if you have a phone, or radio and you're trying to communicate with somebody far away, the more powerful that signal is, the more clearly and more reliably that message gets to them. This is a pretty powerful signal. Unfortunately, somebody had to die. He was a bad guy anyway. Another bad guy, Ramsay Bolton. You remember this man? He's like, imagine the worst person ever to live in the history of the world. He's worse, like a lot worse. So if you didn't watch the show, I can't explain the kinds of things he did on stage right now, but he's a terrible man. And they're enemies. And so this is another example of signaling. It's even more subtle, but I think it's a powerful example. Jon Snow challenges Ramsay. So the two of them have gathered to fight the battle to the death. Big, big battle. It's like the most exciting part of season 8 or 7. They're going to fight. And Jon Snow says to this other guy, I will fight you one-on-one, just the two of us. We fight, whoever wins the whole battle. None of our soldiers have to get injured. None of our soldiers have to die. Ramsay says, no way. I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to ride back to my guys and send all of them forward. And Jon Snow wins. He wins this situation here because what he did is he forced Ramsay Bolton to signal that he doesn't care about his troops. So he just totally undermined Ramsay Bolton's authority in that political play. So he's forced another person to signal, what his true intentions are. So it's a bit more subtle than giving directions or leading by example, but he's definitely influencing people. He's influencing Ramsay's army. Last example for inspiring, and once again, this could be the most vague, but I have a couple of anecdotes to talk about. And it starts with this guy. So this is a man, he's in this 150 or 100,000, 150,000 person army that Jon Snow fought against. They won for a couple reasons, but they won. And right here, this man, his name is Tormund. He's watching his king get burned at the stake. He's a prisoner right now. So that's where he starts. That his story is starting. Watching his king get burned at the stake. Maybe the rest of them are all going to get burned to death, and he's a prisoner. So the following day, Jon Snow brings Tormund into his room, and he tells him, I need your help. I need you to lead the rest of the free folk, the rest of the enemy, and bring them this side of the wall to safety, because there's some serious problems coming. Winter is coming, remember that? Escape that stuff and be with us on this side of the wall. They've been enemies for 10,000 or 8,000 years, fighting. They just lost a fight. Jon Snow says, I need your help. Tormund says, go to hell. What are you talking about, me helping you? I'm your prisoner. Jon Snow frees him, as you can see in this GIF. GIF, is that settled in Spain, by the way? Which one is it here? It's GIF, okay. Yeah, that's what I say, but whatever. But so he's freeing him. He's letting him go. And Jon Snow tells him, the door is locked. You're bigger than me. You could kill me right now. But I need you. I need you to help me bring your people to safety. And so this has a major influence, a huge impact on Tormund. And the rest of the show, he's a different person from this moment. So Tormund says, sure, I'll help you. We will go north, get all of our enemies, and bring them back. And here they are about to sail into the center of another 100,000 enemy. And Tormund asks Jon, do you trust me? And Jon replies, that makes me a fool, doesn't it? I'm trusting an 8,000-year-old enemy. And he says, well, we're fools together now. And the point is, Jon's actions as a leader, freeing this man, putting himself at risk. He signaled, I'm trusting you. He's inspiring him. By example, I'm taking a huge risk. You take a huge risk. We can support each other in taking a big risk in going and talking to these hundreds of people and saying, hey, trust us. We've been your enemy for 8,000 years, but trust us. Come with us south of the wall, and we can all survive together. So he's being a peacemaker now. And it worked out. And seriously, I feel his character arc in Game of Thrones is underrated, but he goes from kind of a nihilist to one of the greatest leaders and most effective leaders in the show. And he still makes funny jokes the entire time. Here he is after this experience. Now, not only did he convince thousands of people to trust the enemy and come south of the wall, now he's trying to talk them into fighting a major battle against much stronger army. They're hungry, they're mostly older men, they're not very strong army, and he's trying to convince them, put your life on the line and fight for this guy, Jon Snow. And they're like, why should we fight for him? He's our enemy. And so Tormund says, these guys have been killing us for years. Jon Snow's changed that. He saved all of us. And if we can't pay that back, we're cowards. So he's using an influence of appealing to the identity, the honor of these men, and saying, if this guy's willing to sacrifice and put himself on the line for you, you have to do that back, because that's your rules. You have to live by your own rules. And of course, they think about it and they realize, we have to fight for this guy. We have to help him. So that was some actually pretty good political work that Tormund did there. So Game of Thrones wrapping up in those examples, and I'd like to get into some specific examples that Agile coaches can do, because you're not going to be able to use magic or swords or bows and arrows to get what you want in your companies. At least I don't think so. But what could you do? So Kanban method is based on people taking acts of leadership. It's been constructed that way from the beginning, meaning there isn't a design to implement. There are practices that a person can implement. It's always been built that way. And we can organize them into levels of, how difficult they are to implement, how elaborate the practices are, how many people do you need to get in agreement to try them. And the first level we can group is if you yourself, anybody in this room, you take initiative, what kind of impact could you have? So is anybody familiar with work that gets blocked? Like you need to get this work done, but it's something stopping you. Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, obviously, right? So this is a very simple practice. It's actually a couple practices. One of them is writing it down. This work is blocked. In Jira, you put a flag on it. Pretty simple. Another one. This was blocked yesterday, and it's blocked today. It's been blocked for 2 days. Now it's been blocked for 7 days. I'm not doing anything other than telling people it's been blocked for 7 days. Maybe the kind of person who can say, let's do something about it, will see this and say, let's do something about it. And then finally, collect the information about the blockers. Last month, we had 25 blockers. This month, we've had 35. And my question for you is, are you able to do some analysis about what's causing the work to get blocked? Could you do some analysis personally? Does anybody need to give you permission to do that? And if you do the analysis and tell other people, I think this is causing our blockers, would they stop you from doing that? And would they appreciate if you did that? Would it make a difference? So you're able to learn these practices and put them to work. Another level, gathering other people and getting them to change the way they do things to improve. Again, that's evolutionary change in practice. We talk about going around the rocks, manage your evolutionary change. Don't design a system and try to switch, evolve your system. That's our approach. From the beginning, we've had the cartoon for that. But here's an example. It's called workflow modeling. And this is basically taking responsibility to find out, how does work? We may have Jira or some other tool. These are the columns, ready, doing, done. It might be more elaborate than that. But exactly what happens to the work? Somebody makes a request. What exactly happens to this request? Who looks at it? Who works on it? Who decides if it's good enough? Where does it go afterwards? From internally, this is the customer inside the company, the product manager, to whoever gets to say this is good or this is not good. What are all the steps? Who's involved? How long does it take? How long do each steps take? How many are we working on at the same time? And what are our results? But in order to do this, you need to ask people questions, and they have to give you these answers. So you have to convince them that it's worth doing this workflow modeling. And the fact is, when you do this, you can end up with a much more reliable system, and the customers, in this case the product managers, are not angry with you anymore. They want to work with you. Then finally, this concept of leadership at all levels, this is advice for people in charge of multiple people. And our advice is it's better to allow people at different parts of the company to make judgment calls. Sometimes they'll make mistakes, but they'll learn from those mistakes, and then you have better judgment at all levels of the company. And here's an example of that happening. This happened at a company in Mexico called Best Day, and it illustrates one way we can deal with dependencies. So this group of people can't keep working until this group of people finishes their work. That you could think of that as a blocker. It might be by design. So some basic practices to do this. One of them is swim lanes. Swim lanes are very simple. You have a board. You draw a horizontal line through it. And some work is above the line. A different kind of work is below the line. Those are swim lanes. So let's say you're using sprints, and then you get bugs in production. Do you wait till the next sprint, or do you work on it right now? Swim lanes are a way to deal with that kind of thing. I know a bunch of people who use like Scrum, and then they use Kanban for some stuff. All sorts of combinations like that. Capacity allocation, a little bit more complicated, but not if you've already got a swim lane. If you have swim lanes, how many issues, how many tickets, how many stories do you allow in that swim lane at the same time? 20 in this lane, 5 in that lane. That's capacity allocation. It means 25 at a time, 20 here, 5 here. That's an allocation. That's budgeting, by the way. And then finally, class of service. It's treating different work in different ways. So it might be that some work from some customers gets to cut in line. So this request shows up, we stop everything, and we finish this one. Everything else gets to wait. Or other work, it has a due date, and it actually is a due date. If it looks like we might miss the due date, we stop doing everything else and finish this one. Basic Kanban practices. You learn those on a blog, book, training. So here's some vocabulary for the next section. I just want to explain the concept of the calling service and a called service. You could think of these as teams, because that's actually what they were. But this team has its board, it does its job, and sometimes this work can't be finished until this team does something to it first. That's a dependency. Does that make sense? So this is the calling service. They're saying, hey, will you do this dependency for me? and then the called service says, yes, we'll get it done. They finish it. They give it back to the calling service, and they finish the ticket. So this is a story of somebody in a team that by themselves applied a Kanban practice and made a big difference for a lot of people. So the calling service says, I need you to do this work. I need you to finish this so that I can finish by the end of my sprint or by my service level agreement, whatever, by the due date. And what these guys down here did is they put in a swim lane, and above the line this is the work that this team does all the time. It's their normal work. But below the line, it was reserved. Only work that comes from these guys can enter this swim lane. So they have slack capacity. So if they have a velocity of 40, they did 35. They reserved 5 for this other group of people in case they want to show up. So that's like having a standby ticket on an airplane, or if you run a restaurant, you leave a nice table open in case like a movie star shows up. You want to make sure they get the nice table. That's capacity allocation. This is the result. I have to read the numbers. But the calling service, so the one that the customer makes a request from and they deliver it to the customer, used to take between 40 and 60 days reliably, like guaranteed, and then 26 days or less to get the work done. So about a month, if you really want to make sure you get this thing done on time, you need to tell us a month in advance. After the person in the other team applied a couple of Kanban practices, actually just 3, we went from 28 days to 18 days. Also, if you understand the shape of this lead time distribution, the amount of work that got done in less than 5 days is more significant. In other words, I forget what percent it was. I'm sorry, I didn't write that down. But the percentage reduction in the lead time of their customer greatly improved just because this one team applied a couple Kanban practices. They took initiative to do it. Nobody asked them to do it. That's something anybody in this room can do. On the other side, the calling service, this is something that they also can do, and we looked at this in the beginning with the blocker ticket. You have your workflow, and sometimes we're waiting for somebody else. This is waiting for an external group. You have to wait for somebody else to do some work, database admin, QA, UX, and then you'll be able to finish development. But you're waiting and waiting and waiting. So just putting the dots up, every day it's late. Every day you wait, you just put a dot up. Nothing more. You could do that in the middle of the night when nobody's watching. You can sneak into the office and put a black dot there and sneak away. You don't need permission to do this. Someday, somebody who has authority is going to walk by and see these dots. What are those dots? We've been waiting for 4 days for this to get done. It's late. Marking that stuff up. And then finally, this concept of applying a WIP limit, meaning if we as a team are constantly waiting for this work to get done, we're going to make a policy. We won't start new work until the group we are relying on starts managing their delivery to us. So this is a little bit more confrontational because you're saying, you are stopping us and we're not going to do any work until you move forward. That takes a little bit more courage in leadership, and I would warn you, it takes some more authority to do that. The example before, anybody can do. Now, one last example. I don't know if you know what this is, or if you've tried to use it. We can't read the title. It comes from a very popular tool. that actually doesn't really support Kanban metrics at all. It really doesn't. We've talked to them, they're not interested in working with us. But you can do something about it. Agile or Kanban coaches can help you with this kind of stuff. But you could make custom fields to change the way the data is created so that you can export the data and you can get metrics that you can actually work with. If you don't know how these things work, that you can read about it, you can take a class on how to use Kanban metrics. But the point is, you can do something about it. You don't have to switch tools necessarily. You can just learn how to use them better and get started with that. And then you can make decisions based on data that actually make a positive difference for the managers and the product people in the company. They'll appreciate that. They'll want you to do it more. So finally, this is one last story I want to tell about taking initiative on your own from the ground up. There's a story, and you could read this blog post. This guy started to work for Optimizely. This is a public case. And he's not in this room, which is actually a really good sign because they're using it. But he started with one column, and he wanted to know where work came from, where work went, because they weren't getting stuff done, even though his team was performing really well. So he pushed desks away from the wall and started doing this. They said he wasn't allowed to do this, but he's got a lot of guts, and he did it anyway. And eventually, anytime anybody asked him a question, he was like a director of development. Anytime anybody asked him a question, he would walk up to the wall and look at the wall until they got next to him, then he would answer the question. He never answered the question any other way. He trained them, use this wall, use the board to talk about work. And they ended up with like one of the most impressive, successful Kanban implementations in North America. This is Optimizely. And the coolest part about this, the development guy is the one who did this work. The product manager is the one taking all the credit. I think that's actually pretty cool because this is the kind of company where venture capitalists raise money for new features. So the product guy is saying, we make these new features because we're doing work like this. So he's speaking on our behalf. That's a really nice thing. So product owners are able to make a difference. There's actions that they can take. I don't want to get into more examples about this, but it's not just the Scrum Masters, it's not just the engineers, the technical leads. People on both ends of the spectrum in a company can start taking steps to make a difference. And so it's never been our intention in the Kanban method to force things on people. We've always wanted to avoid doing that. That's where the whole process, the whole method came from. And we don't say you need to stop doing what you're doing. We don't do that. We know if you try to get people to do stuff that they're not willing to do, they're going to resist you. I mean, that's an obvious point. But it's the most common thing especially for highly trained, highly educated people to do is hey, I know better. I have all the ideas. You should do it my way. And we cause resistance. We need to get people to be willing to try these things, try them on their own. The goal is we want them to say, hey, let's do something about it. You don't want to be pushing it on them. Because when you push too hard, if you push too much change too soon on people who aren't ready, I don't know if you remember what's about to happen here, but it can be bad for you. And it could be bad for everybody. People can say, Agile doesn't work, we tried it. And they don't want to hear about it until 5 to 10 years later when there's a completely new management team. So pushing is not a good idea. That's why our method is anti-push. But if you play your cards right, if you take risks, if you lead by example, if you spend more effort trying to figure out how to inspire people, like paint a clear picture to them that's attractive, that motivates them, you can end up king of the game, Game of Thrones. You can win the game. Because essentially leadership is politics, but you don't have to murder people, trick them, lie to them to win. You can give them better options. So thanks. I'll talk just a little bit about some resources for you, because I've been trying to say you all can learn to do stuff and do this yourself. So there's resources available. These are books. You have to read them. There's also other like ebooks, shorter things you can download. All of that is meant to help you. We have other resources now available to download. This is free stuff. You just download it. If you're trying to convince your boss, why should we, spend some money on some more agile coaching? Well, if you want these results, if you want a company like this, spend some more money on coaching. So if you download this off the website later, you can learn a little bit more about me, about our company. And just to be clear, we are offering a promotion to the attendees at this conference, which there's like a lot of you. This is a huge conference. But we're really happy that this is happening here in Spain, and we want to support you. So we have a promotion. And that's it. Thank you.